Good evening again, and after a long and very important day, we're pleased to have here with us Minister Adel AL-JUBEIR, Minister of Foreign Affairs of Saudi Arabia. Maurizio Molinari, Editor-in-Chief of La Stampa, will share with me the pleasure of this conversation. Minister AL-JUBEIR, let's start from your country, which is going through a very particular moment of reforms, of changes, and the entire world is very interested in what you're doing. What is your idea of reforms you're going through? You often speak about Vision 2030, so please, let's start from there.
Correct, yes. Saudi Arabia is going through some very exciting times. We are trying to reform our country. We're trying to implement what we call our Vision 2030. The idea is to have an efficient, transparent, accountable government. The idea is to have a diversified economy that's not dependent on oil. The idea is to empower our youth, to empower women, to open up areas for investment, additional areas of investment, whether it's in mining, whether it's in tourism, whether it's in recreation, whether it's in petrochemicals, whether it's in other areas, focus on small and mid-sized businesses. Our objective is to provide the ability for our young people to pursue their hopes, their dreams, and their ambitions. We want our country to be focused on innovation and to be cutting edge, technology-wise. This is how we believe we will be a stronger, more prosperous country that is less dependent on oil.
So you're really seeing that as a travel away from oil, as someone described it?
Yes.
Mr. Minister, due to how the civil war is going in Syria, and especially with the fact that the regime is almost winning on the ground, the Islamic Republic of Iran looks like that will have the opportunity to build a kind of land bridge from Tehran to Baghdad to Damascus and Beirut. Do you fear a scenario like this, and how a scenario like this could be stopped?
That's a very, very broad-based question, so let me try to tackle it in terms of sides. I believe that we had the Syrian opposition in Riyadh last week, and we were able to take all of the different opposition groups and merge them into one, so now they can speak with one voice. They have adopted a political platform that we think is very realistic, and they are now in Geneva discussing or negotiating with the regime how to implement a political transition. And we support them in this area, and I believe that the international community supports them in this area. We want to see Syria resolved on the basis of the Geneva I Declaration and Security Council Resolution 2254, which calls for an interim governing council elections, constitution elections, and a new future for Syria. So that is, we believe, pointing in the right direction. With regards to Iran and its negative role in Syria and in Iraq and in Lebanon, I think this started in 1979 with the Khomeini Revolution. The Khomeini Revolution does not recognize borders. The Khomeini Revolution does not recognize nationality. It believes that all the Shia belong to Iran. The Khomeini Revolution believes in exporting this revolution. And so that's what we're seeing. We see Iran's negative influence throughout the region, and we're trying to work in order to push back against this. We see Iran as negative influence in Yemen. We see Iran violating the ballistic missile resolutions by providing them to radical militias such as the Houthis in Yemen. We saw one missile intercepted yesterday that was launched by those militias into Saudi Arabia. We saw prior to on November 4th, a ballistic missile that almost landed in Riyadh International Airport. These are all Iranian missiles. And so this is Iran's policy since 1979. And with this policy comes a total disregard for international law, a total disregard for the principle of non-interference in the affairs of others, and a total disregard for the principle of good neighborliness. We saw Iran since 1979 be the world's chief sponsor of terrorism. That's why they're under sanctions. They blew up the American embassy in Beirut. They murdered 270 Marines at Beirut International Airport. They blew up a synagogue in Argentina, killing several hundred people. They committed terrorist acts in Europe, in a number of countries. They assassinated diplomats. They attacked and destroyed more than 12 embassies. They planned terror cells in our countries. They committed terrorist operations in our country in 1996. Khobar Towers, the Iranians were responsible for it. The control officer was General Sharifi, their military attaché in Bahrain. The bomb maker was Hezbollah. The explosives came from the Bekaa Valley. And the three leaders of the plot, all Saudi citizens, one Lebanese, I guess, fled and have been living in Iran since. We captured the head 2 years ago in Lebanon with an Iranian passport. So this is aiding and abetting and sheltering terrorists. The board of directors of Al-Qaeda has been living in Iran since 2001, including Osama bin Laden's son Saad. Al-Qaeda and Daesh, Iran facilitated their movement. We know from bin Laden's, the documents that were captured in bin Laden's house in Abbottabad, that Al-Qaeda had extensive dealings with Iran. We know from Osama bin Laden's documents that he directed his lieutenants to seek Iran's advice and to coordinate with the Iranians. Isn't this aiding and abetting terrorist organizations? And so since 1979, the Iranians have literally gotten away with murder in our region and in the world, and it's time for this to stop. And we intend to take a firm position on protecting our people, protecting our region, and making sure that the Iranians know that there's a price that they pay for these aggressive and hostile policies that they pursue. So do I think the Iranian objective is to have a land bridge to the Mediterranean? Absolutely. And they make no bones about it. They established Hezbollah, a terrorist organization in Lebanon, whose objective is to serve Iran's interests and not Lebanese interests. And they use this organization in Syria, in Iraq, in Bahrain, in Yemen. And Hezbollah uses Lebanese banks to launder money and Lebanese ports to smuggle drugs. That's how they finance themselves in part. And we believe that the world must take firm action against these terrorist organizations if we want to give Lebanon a fighting chance to have a better and more secure and prosperous future.
Mr. Minister, even listening to your answer is absolutely obvious whom do you oppose. But let's have a look to the allies. And so in this process of reforms, is there any restructure of the old allies and the old balances? I mean, how do you see your relation towards US, Russia, and this idea of normalization towards Israel? Is that a reality? To what extent?
We have good relations with almost every country in the world, except Iran and North Korea. Iran and North Korea. We don't have relations with Israel because we're waiting for a peace process to conclude. We have extensive trade relations with people around the world. We have good political relations with a number of countries around the world, and we have very, very close ties with important allies in the region, with the US, with Britain, with Italy, with France, with Germany, with other countries in Europe. We are developing great relations with Russia. We have great ties with China, with Japan, with South Korea, with India, Australia, New Zealand. I mean, wherever we can build bridges, we build bridges. We have good relations all across Africa, and we use those relations for the benefit of both countries, to promote trade and investment, to align our political positions, and frankly, to make friends. And so, and again, when I say we don't have good relations with Iran, because their philosophy is the other way around. Can you name friends of Iran other than Bashar al-Assad and North Korea? I don't know. So we built, so in terms of changing or realigning because of Vision 2030, no, it's reinforcing. All of our friends have something to contribute. Some contribute technology, some contribute robotics, some contribute with manufacturing, some contribute with antiquities, some contribute with education, and we're trying to develop our country in the best possible way.
Mr. Minister, since 2015, your country has been attacked with more than 300 missiles from Yemen, with a growing danger for the border communities and also main cities, as you were telling before. What do you believe is the plan of the Houthi rebels and their allies? Do you believe they want to bring the war inside your kingdom? They want actually to invade Saudi Arabia? or is just their aim is to humiliate your country or to change the balance in the region?
They can't humiliate our country, and they can't change the balance in the region, and they can't wage war against us. They can use terror by hitting villages, by launching ballistic missiles at our territory. But what they've done is tried to take over the country of Yemen. The Houthis are 50,000 people in a country of 28 million. The Yemenis had worked on a political process for a future of Yemen that we helped put together, the transition period and the national dialogues. They agreed on what Yemen's future should look like, a federal state, how many states, what kind of government, and then they began to write or draft a constitution, and the Houthis struck. They invaded Sa'da, went from Sa'da to Umran and captured Sana'a, the capital city, took over the government. Now we have a radical militia allied with Iran and Hezbollah, in control of a country, in control of an air force, and in control of ballistic missiles. It's unprecedented, I think, in the history of the world. And they tried to impose their will on Yemen. And they ignored the 28 million people, and they took charge of the government. They pursued the president, imprisoned him in his house, and when he fled and went to Aden, they chased him there, and basically they took over the country. We responded to the legitimate request from a legitimate government under Article 51 of the UN Charter, and we, with a coalition of 10 countries, proceeded to restore the legitimate government of Yemen. This is what it's about. We didn't start this, we didn't want this. The Houthis started this, and the Houthis cannot be allowed to take over a country. We have had a political process that we support, driven by the United Nations. We have had more than 70 understandings. Every single one of them, the Houthis reneged on. And so we continue to pursue the political process, and we continue to pursue the military process, and we hope that eventually the Houthis will realize that this is not winnable, and that they will make peace. They are Yemeni citizens. They have every right to participate in the political process, but they can't control the country. Not if you're 50,000 and the country is 28 million. That's ridiculous. And so this is where we are. We are very concerned about the humanitarian situation in Yemen. We have been by far the largest donor of humanitarian assistance to Yemen. We have set aside more than $10 billion for the reconstruction of Yemen. We believe that with other friendly countries we can double that number. But we need the fighting to stop. And we need the Houthis to recognize that the interests of Yemen and the Yemeni people require them to play within the rules, not outside the rules. That's what they don't seem to be understanding. We are looking at ways of enhancing the flow of humanitarian assistance into Yemeni ports and airports, and we're looking at mechanisms for being able to enhance the inspections while at the same time easing the flow of assistance. And I think we have begun to take steps in this direction, and in the coming days and few weeks we will make more announcements in this area.
Minister, you know that for Europe and normally for the world, the idea of terrorism has been one of the biggest threats around. So I'm asking here two questions in one, actually, because what's your view on ISIS and Daesh? The defeat on the ground is really enough to consider it defeated? And aside from this, do you really think your country did everything it could in these last years to fight terrorism? Because, you know, in every country there are differences and also some areas out of control. Are you afraid that some areas of your country were out of control when it came to terrorism?
I think when you look at Daesh or ISIS, these are terrorists. These are psychopaths. These are criminals. These people have no religion, no faith, no morality, no humanity. You can't kill innocent people for whatever reason and expect it to be right. It's not. It's wrong. Every religion condemns this. Every religion, including the Islamic faith. It is revealed in the Quran that he who kills an innocent soul is as if he killed all of humanity. This is not acceptable. The Kingdom of Saudi Arabia has been a victim of terrorism. We have fought and continue to fight very hard against it. We believe that we need three elements in order to defeat terrorism. We need to fight the men, the money, and the mindset. The men is easy. Train and equip forces and put them to battle. The money is more complicated. You need systems in your banks, you need regulatory stuff, you need things involving tracking cash couriers and so forth, but we have a handle on it. The third is the mindset. This is the part that takes a generation. And it has to be a whole of government or a whole of society approach. It has to involve schools, it has to involve media, it has to involve government, it has to involve mosques, it has to involve social clubs, everything. And the message has to be consistent, that this is wrong, this is not our faith, that this is evil, and that we need to fight it. And this is what my country has been doing. We have argued this for the last 15 years. We are looking at dealing with the ideology and the mindset. We established a center in Saudi Arabia called Adel to deal with extremism, and it's a global center. We have initiatives in terms of financing of terrorism, and nobody can say that Saudi Arabia has not been extremely robust in fighting terrorists. In the 1990s, when we used to argue to our friends in Europe that there are individuals who are promoting violence and hate and terrorism, we were told, no, these people are political, it's about freedom of speech. In 2001, these people who were about freedom of speech turned out to be terrorists. And so we can't be cute about it. We have to be very firm. No to terrorism, no to terror financing, and no to extremism and the mindset. No to providing platforms for hate or incitement, and no to interfering in the affairs of other countries, and no to harboring people who are wanted. You can't say one man's terrorist and another man's freedom fighter. Anyone who kills the innocent is a criminal and a terrorist and should be punished. This is how we look at it.
Mr. Minister, let's speak about Libya a little bit.
About?
Libya.
Okay.
Do you see in Mr. al-Sarraj a reliable national leader? Do you trust General Haftar? And more in general, we are approaching the deadline of the Skirat agreement on December 17. On your view, will have to be renewed?
Well, with regards to the personalities of Libya, it's not important what I think of them. What's important is what the Libyan people think of them. And this is something for them to decide. We have always believed that we need to come up with one vision for Libya, which I believe we now pretty much have. And we need to have one entity that drives this process of reconciliation. And we have that in the form of Mr. Ghassan Salama. So the United Nations envoy is driving this process, and our role is to support his efforts. And what he was able to do is reach some common ground among the different Libyan leaders on what needs to be done. The Skirat agreement, there was talk about modifying some of it or amending some of it. The deadline of 17 December, I don't believe, is a hard and fast deadline. I believe there's the 16th and the 18th could be the same. The only difference is the number 17 is in between. Where there is a view of moving forward towards elections, I think we should pursue that. And so we have been supportive of the UN Special Envoy in Libya, and we're prepared to assist in any way that we can to ensure the success.
Obviously, I cannot avoid, because we're moving around the region, and you've been at the center of this Lebanese story. So I'd like you to tell us what's the situation now, and how is it projecting in future?
And especially, Mr. Minister, we have a real hot topic here, hot question. What kind of leader is MBS?
Okay.
No, we mixed it up, I think, because the microphone is not going too well. So let's stay on Lebanon for a second, and then we move back to Saudi Arabia.
Lebanon is a tragic situation. It's a country that was hijacked by a foreign country through a militia that is a terrorist organization. That's what you have. Lebanon is dominated by Hezbollah. They either do it subtly or they kill you. And we've seen that. It's the only entity that has an armed force in the country, and they use it against their own people. They say that these arms are for the resistance. What's the resistance doing in Libya, Iraq, Yemen, Syria? Nothing. Doing Iran's bidding. And so this is, as long as you have an armed militia, you will not have peace in Lebanon, no matter what we try to tell ourselves. So the solution to Lebanon is disarming Hezbollah and turning it into a political party like all other Lebanese entities. And this is going to be very, very difficult. So that's what we have in Lebanon. Having said that, I think we have a situation where Prime Minister Saad Hariri formed a coalition government and an understanding with President Aoun and to some extent Hezbollah. And then he was not allowed to pursue his agenda. And then he said, enough is enough, and he left. And now they're all saying, come back, come back, come back. We'll fix the issue, we'll fix the issue. And it's become clear to the Lebanese that Mr. Hariri is by far the largest political personality in Lebanon, and that they need to give him space in order to pursue his policies. And we're hoping that this will be the case, and I think that's why he suspended his resignation. But ultimately, Lebanon will only be fixed. Not fixed, Lebanon is fixed. Lebanon will only survive or prosper if you disarm Hezbollah. And for us in Saudi Arabia, Lebanon is critically important. If it didn't exist in the Arab world, we would want to invent it. It's an example of coexistence of different faiths, of different ethnicities. And the survival of this experiment is critical to the survival of the Middle East and the Arab world. Because if this, I call it an experiment, although it's not an experiment, it's a reality. If this reality fails, no minority will feel safe in the Middle East.
Maurizio's question was a very good one, so go ahead.
There is a lot of curiosity about MBS. Everyone in the West wants to know more about him.
Yes, please elaborate.
Please, the floor is yours.
He has vision. He has ambition for his country. He has commitment. He has an incredible work ethic. He cares about his people deeply. He is decisive. He's strong. He's gentle. He wants his country to be a normal country. He wants to change the country to something better. He wants to empower youth. He wants to provide them with opportunity. He wants to instill a culture of innovation. He wants to empower women. He wants to return towards a moderate Islam. That's what Mohammed bin Salman is about. And we are very fortunate to have him as one of our leaders in this critical period of our country's history.
And so you don't think that these reforms and the crackdown on corruption can scare someone in the public opinion? You think it's...
Quite the contrary. I think we tried to deal with corruption from the bottom up, but it didn't work. So now you deal with it from the top down. The King Salman announced almost 3 years ago that he will be very firm in dealing with corruption, and people watched. 6 months ago, Prince Mohammed said, we will deal with corruption, whether it's princes or ministers. And people didn't think it was serious. An investigation was started more than 2 years ago that looked at all of these issues. And when a critical mass was put together, the people were brought in and basically told, you have a choice. You stole money, you acknowledge wrongdoing and you return it, or we take you to court. That's why they're in a hotel and not in the jail. And the amount of assets that they discovered that were stolen were in excess of $100 billion. That's a lot of money. This is money that could have gone to build schools and roads and hospitals. This money that could have gone to send young men and women on scholarships. This is money that could have gone towards investments that help improve the long-term financial position of the country. And now everybody knows that we're serious. And I think that as a foreign investor, if I was afraid of going into Saudi Arabia because somebody may want a kickback or may give me a hard time, now I know that this is no longer the case. So just like we have a policy of zero tolerance on terrorism and extremism, we have a policy of zero tolerance on corruption. And so this move has been extremely, extremely popular in Saudi Arabia because people feel that now we have our country back.
Mr. Minister, one very last question. We're waiting for the U.S. administration initiative on Middle East. So your view is that the peace between Israel and Palestine could come from a larger reconciliation among the Arab state and Israel, or we should wait for initial agreement between Israelis and Palestinians to have a larger reconciliation?
I think the settlement of the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, and by extension the Israeli-Arab conflict, is very simple. You can draw it on the back of an envelope. 2 states, 67 borders, minor mutually agreed to adjustments where 70% of the settlers who are on the green line remain in Israel, and the other 30% you offer them compensation or alternative housing and they can move to Israel. Jerusalem, East Jerusalem, Palestinian capital, West Jerusalem, Israeli capital, work arrangements with regards to the old city. Refugees, we have a solution to it. The borders, we have, the security, we have a solution to it. It's not rocket science. We've been there in 2000 and we've been there in 2008. What it needs is the political will to make the deal. And the role of the countries is to encourage the two parties to take the steps necessary in order to reach an agreement. And this is the longest running conflict in the Middle East. And it is the only conflict that can reverberate throughout the world. We ignore it, something happens in Jerusalem, and you have half the world in flames or up in arms. So it's critically important that we resolve this. The Arab countries adopted the Arab Peace Initiative in 2002 at the Beirut Summit that calls for essentially a settlement along those lines, in less detail, but along those lines basically, in exchange for peace between Israel and all the Arab countries. In December of 2005, the Organization of Islamic Countries in the summit in Mecca also adopted this plan, opening the way for peace between Israel and more than 50 Muslim countries. So that's where we are. And we are waiting for progress in this area. We have had conversations with the Trump administration, and we still do. We believe that they are looking at different ideas and talking to all the parties to see what they can put together in terms of a possible package for a settlement, and we will continue to work with them and see when the time is right how one proceeds.
Mr. Minister, thank you very much. It has been an open and important conversation. Thank you very much.
Thank you.